everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And today, joining us is a returning guest making their second appearance here on the channel. Now, if you remember this guest, my guest grew up on the south coast of England near Bournemouth. He lost his father when he was 5 and was brought up by his mother. He was educated at Reed School in Surrey, and at 21, he joined the Metropolitan Police Service, serving for 30 years in a variety of roles and departments. And his most recent work, On the Beat, describes his first 9 years at service at Battersea Police Station. And since retirement, my guest has worked in a variety of roles before embarking on his writing journey. Initially, the writing was a way to ease the boredom of the COVID restrictions, but now he has published his third book following the 2022 debut, Dysfunction and Indomitable, which came out February of last year. My guest is married to Paula, and having lived in Sussex for many years, he decided to embark on a new challenge in 2023. In July of that year, they moved to the small village of Neuvik in Dordogne, France, and the time is now spent between tending to their large garden, supporting Paula's continued business interests, and finding time for my guest's writing passion. And my guest's interests are many and varied. He's played hockey for many years for the police and then for Crowborough Hockey Club, where he and his wife met. My guest enjoys the outdoors, particularly walking great distances across the South Downs and now the numerous Bolsh in France. He collects stamps and Scottish malt whiskey. He is a keen motorcyclist and has now become a member of a local like-minded group. And my guest has more work in the pipeline with a new story set in France currently in development. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to a returning guest, Mr. Guy Robbins. Guy, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I look forward to answering your questions, chatting to you about what I've been up to since I last spoke with you.
Awesome. So before we dive into your most upcoming work, let's actually talk a little bit about that. So how have you been? Like, what have you been up to since the last time you were on the show?
So we talked about the book I just released, Indomitable, my second book. Did a fair bit of promotional work for that around the local markets of France, where I knew there was quite a large number of English people. So obviously I live in France and I don't speak French fluently yet, so I need an English-speaking audience at the moment. We are planning to maybe translate the new book into French, as well as putting it out in an English version. So I'm trying to tap into as many of my audience as I can. So we spent the last year, I suppose, doing up the house, getting the things straight that we needed to sort out, getting to grips with living in a foreign country, acclimatizing, meeting and making friends with new people, trying to come to terms and learn the language, which is an ongoing project. We're getting there. Getting the garden as we would like it, again, which is probably never going to end. And Paula obviously has always and still is very busy with her own business interests, and that gives me the time to indulge my now new passion for writing. And since publishing Indomitable, I spent the best part of last year topping and tailing the book I want to talk to you about in a moment, On the Beat, about my early police career. And since the publication of that, I've moved on to writing a new story, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to set it in France. It's going to be a frightening horror thriller set in
Okay.
I'm changing genres yet again, to sort of try and bring some more interest. And I don't know whether it's because I haven't found my perfect niche for writing, but I tend to just write what comes into my mind. And this particular story, it was one of about 7 projects that I'd jotted down a few ideas for. And I passed my notebook to Paula, and she just said, "Do number 5. That appeals to me." And that's the one I'm currently writing. And as I say, I hope to have it in a position to publish towards the end of this year, with any luck.
Awesome. Awesome. That's a great guy. You have been very, very busy, which is always good to see. So, yes, viewers and listeners. So, today's episode, we'll be talking about Guy's book, On the Beat, which talks about his time with the Metropolitan Police the first 9 years. So, Guy, as a little introduction, what was the decision that drove you to write about the first 9 years, as opposed to, let's say, someone saying, well, why couldn't you write a book about your entire police career? What particular reason did you focus on those first 9 years?
Well, it's an easy way to split it into 9 years because that was 9 years spent at the same station, the same police station, at Battersea Police Station, which is just
Mm.
south of Thames. And after the 9 years, I then was transferred somewhere else. So it was a good place to stop the story. It was
Ah,
also
okay.
because it was my first police station. It sticks in the memory. The people that I worked with, some of whom are still really close friends today, some 35 years later. And we, as a group of people, worked together, played together. It was a hard-working, hard-playing group of individuals that came together as a team. And I, I started it by accident. I'd written a poem for my wife for her birthday in 2023. And she said, "You ought to write a few more poems." That was quite good. That was very kind of you. And I happened to be sitting, drinking a coffee, waiting one day with time on my hands, and I sketched out half a dozen poems about my early police career, just aspects of it, talking about the body of people I worked with, talking about some of the shifts I worked, some of the individual incidents and cases that I dealt with.
Mm.
And when I'd put together, I reckon I must have had 20 poems, it suddenly struck me that if I was to put some flesh on each of the poems in the form of a chapter, I could create quite an interesting story or collection of stories and anecdotes and sort of string it together. So I started with the poems and then the stories came after that. And before I knew where I was, towards the sort of the time we were producing and publishing Indomitable, I had a pretty healthy manuscript. And it then just was a case of getting it in the right order, making it work insofar as that you appreciate that in a job like the police service, you use colloquialisms and slang and jargon
Mm.
that the general public might struggle with. So I had to add things like a glossary of terms. I had to put in some explanations, and certainly if it's going to fly your side of the pond, I'm going to have to think that it's an international book. I mean, obviously, policing in the United Kingdom is incredibly different to policing in the United States. The main
Hmm.
difference effect is the fact that we don't carry firearms.
Right.
And so you basically tell someone to stop, or I'll say stop again. That's just about the size of it.
Hmm.
We don't have a great deal in the way of, as I say, I did as it turns out, I did end up carrying a firearm in a different department subsequent to this book, and there's possibly room for maybe volume 2 or stroke 3 for the rest of my police career. But as a starting point, this was an interesting project to work on. I sought the advice and help from former colleagues. They were kind enough to write and tell me what they thought about their time working at the police station at that time. And I was able to cobble together a chapter at the end, which I've basically entitled Witness Statements. And each of these individuals, I've put their little comments at the end. And I think I was heartened by the fact that it seemed to me that the overriding word that came to mind amongst most of them was camaraderie,
Mm.
team ethos that we engendered as we worked together, sometimes over long periods of time, extended hours, and dealt with some fairly traumatic things. There was a lot of humour. It's, I hope, the same in the United States. The police officer has a humorous side, sometimes quite a dark humour, but it's almost a coping mechanism of getting through some of the more difficult incidents that you might end up dealing with. And I hope if some of your listeners and watchers pick up this book, that they will see that it translates just as well to the American system of policing as it does in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely, absolutely, Guy. And that kind of brings into the discussion of, the creation of this book. Now, you did mention before that this book initially started off as a series of poems to your wife, and then over time it gradually became, a manuscript that was a collection of short stories that detailed your time in the police department for the first 9 years, as well as referencing certain cases with fellow colleagues. Now, when you began that transition from poems to short stories, what were the goals you had for yourself as the author, as well as the promise you were making to your future readers, as well as established readers?
I think I wanted to show that there's a human side to what I did for 30 years, and the fact that you come into something like the police service at the age that I did, literally before my 21st birthday. There's not a lot of life experience there, and you hit the ground running. And it showed that the naivety and the youngness of my own self had to learn very quickly. And you were aided by some pretty experienced and very helpful colleagues, both in terms of those of the same rank as you and also the supervisory officers that looked after that particular section of officers. I think it helped me come to terms with some of the things that I dealt with all those years ago that had actually affected me at that time. And I think we're talking about an era, the late 1980s and 90s, when there wasn't in place about things like mental health, welfare, and I think you very much were left to your own devices or within your group of colleagues and friends to deal with it as you saw fit. You could deal with something pretty dreadful and then go home at the end of the day and expect to live a normal life. It doesn't work like that. And I think this became really quite cathartic for me to cobble this collection of stories together, relive them if you like, but in a way that I could put a modern steer on it and put some explanation into why perhaps we dealt with things in that way, and try and give opinion about where maybe in more modern times policing might, certainly in the United Kingdom, have gone down the wrong path. I wasn't going to desperately didn't want to lecture people.
Right.
It just important to have a few strands in the story that perhaps those things that we did back then, they kind of worked, and we seem to have moved away from that because we've got quite concerned about how we deal with things. I'm a great communicator, and communication became a key when I was working as a police officer, and it got better as I got older and more experienced. And obviously now in my fast approaching 60s, I'm feeling that I am in a much better position to explain things that I did in my formative years in the police service. And as I move forward, as I become more experienced as a writer, then I have a better way of describing situations. So it's like a building block. So we've got a factual story that I've produced and talking about with you, but it's helping me as I push forward with my fictional writing, because I can put myself in the situations that perhaps some of my fictional characters are going to be faced with, because I've brought back those memories. So it's been a really helpful journey for me, and I hope when people get a chance to read it, they will feel that too.
That's good. That's really good to hear, Guy. Now, when you were in the process of, formatting this book, what was the initial reaction like from your wife as well as from your colleagues who you were able to share the early versions? Were they, very, very positive, a little bit critical in certain chapters, or somewhere down the middle, that nice sweet spot?
A bit of all of that. I think there were things that made people laugh, which was important. People laughed out loud. There were things that people said that it made them very sad and shocked them, there were a couple of stories that I in fact pulled from the original manuscript. So I just felt they were too personal and didn't fit in with the general tone that I was trying to set for the entire book. And Paula, who's my sort of main and first proofreader, she adapted a couple of the pieces. She removed some of the terminology that I used, and we used different language. And we flipped the order a little bit as well of some of the chapters, just to make it flow better, so that there is that continuing thread that goes all the way through from the beginning right through. Bearing in mind, I tried to do it chronologically, even though I'm talking about different things, from my early days in the early 80s right through to the time the book finishes, which is sort of early 90s. So we tried to sort of show me as a young 20-year-old wet behind the ears copper, and finishing as quite a reasonably experienced, well-known figure within the hierarchy of that team of officers that work together. So yeah, I think all three of those aspects really.
And would you feel that, looking at these responses, that your promise to your readers was validated, that they were able to get what you delivered on through this book? And it's almost like a memoir in a way, because you are sharing a part of your life that's now open to the public, where only a select few knew about it.
Yeah, I think I achieved what I set out, insofar as that people have come back to me now and said that the book shows that you cared greatly, that
Right.
you had a great deal of empathy with the people that you worked with the people that you were serving, the general public, that you, as a individual, could be faced with some pretty awful situations, but you would deal with them. You would file that particular aspect of the job away and move on to your next task. The friendships that you created, the humorous moments, the wind-ups that take place within a group of officers, which is almost like an initiation ceremony. The frequency of having a beer after work, which was a very key important ingredient to becoming part of the team. Getting people to understand how you would be under pressure. When you're new, you're treated perhaps with a degree of skepticism. They're not quite sure how's this chap going to respond in a given situation. You deal with one or two major sort of incidents. You go to one or two major disturbances and fights. Your team very quickly gets to know how you're going to behave and be able to be relied upon in those circumstances. And if you deal with something horrendous, a major incident, of which, for whatever reason, that time in London for me, we seemed to just bounce from one major incident to another. It just seemed to be that time, the late 80s, early 90s. London was still in the grip of the, at that time, the IRA, who were actually bombing places in London. And so you had that to deal with. We still had so many different things that went on that some of your listeners, your watchers, they may have heard of. We had a rail crash right in the middle of our ground, the Clapham rail crash in 1988. This was right in the middle of my territory. 36 dead. It's not something that you drive around a corner to and come to and think, oh, it's just a minor traffic accident. This is a major catastrophe. And we just seem to sort of, as a group of people, deal with these incidents again and again and again. And it built up a real resilience and strength amongst us. And again, I think people have been kind enough to say that's the aspect of it that they took away, that they could read the book and be howling with laughter at one moment, almost in tears, or genuinely in tears at other moments of the story, and then find themselves shocked and awed by some of the things that we were faced with. And I think I managed to to create almost an emotional roller coaster for the people that came back to me and told me what they thought of the book, and that there was a real honesty and truth to everything, that they felt well worth the read and most enjoyable.
Well, that's great to hear again, Guy. And it seems like that a lot of people have enjoyed you being open about, your early policing years. Because that leads down to a question of, a sense of vulnerability and what that means as an author. Because as authors, whenever we write a book, no matter what it is, we do put a piece of ourselves into our works. And especially if this is a nonfiction slash memoir style book, it's going to have a lot more of us in it because it is, a part of our lives. We have these memories. And when we share that with viewers and listeners, as well as our readers, it's a double-edged sword because on one side, you can reach more people widely and greatly and be able to share your story open and freely. But on the other side of the coin, as authors, we do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of negativity, trolls, hate speech, and so forth. And all that can be very detrimental to an author's state of mind, sense of being, and so forth. And imposter syndrome is always going to be a back of everybody's mind and increase one's anxiety. So, Guy, I think you probably answered this, or maybe your answer may be the same or different from your last interview. But when writing this book, has imposter syndrome or, this sense of anxiety changed with every book you've written? And what has disciplined you to not only continue writing books, but also continue writing this particular story? Because it is very personal, it is tied to your life. And also going back to what you said earlier, there were some stories you had to take out because it brought up too painful of memories for not just yourself, but also for others who were involved.
Yeah, it's very true. So I think if I decided to try and write this as a first book, as a debut, then it would have been incredibly difficult. I think had the two previous novels, fictional novels published, then my confidence in my ability to construct a book on two occasions and to go through the process of publishing two books and then to promote, market, advertise, be interviewed by someone like your good self and discuss my work, then I felt I was in a much better position to create this particular story. Yeah, you're right. It does lead you wide open because you're talking about yourself, but there's a confidence now, and there's also, I feel less pressure than I ever did. I don't think I see the figures and the returns and the sales in the same way as I did when I first started. It doesn't bother me. I write, I love what I do. I'm in the fortunate position of not having to be a successful writer to make the ends meet and put food on the table. I'm a retired person, and we live reasonably well. So my writing is very much a hobby. Yes, I'd like to spread my message. I'd like to gain a larger following and get more people to read my stuff, but I'm not impatient, and I can accept that it might be a few years before I build that. But in the meantime, as I said to you at the start, book number 4 is happily underway. I've tested the water with this, and I really did feel that with my fellow police officers, they could be quite a tough audience. And if I could satisfy them and make them accept what I did tell quite a few of them. I went to a get-together in July of last year, and I mentioned that this book was going to be coming out towards Christmas time of last year. And they, to a man and lady and person, they were very supportive. it's a really good idea. We think you'll do a good job. We've read your last two books. You did a good job with those. I'm sure you've got the ability to put together a really good story. And a couple of others have said, "Oh, I'd really like to do that." So I've sort of always been supportive. If anybody tells me they want to write something, I'll sort of say, "Well, look, if you want any advice, don't hesitate." I don't see anybody as competition. Never have done. I'm a member of a couple of writing groups, and all of them are probably in need of advice and support. But I wait until they ask for it, and if I can help them in any way, I do that. Um, I just feel quite laid back about it all now. I sort of I put stuff out. I wander into independent bookstores and say, "Fancy stock in my book?" And some say yes. Some say, "Well, actually, we're fully stocked at the minute." I say, "Fine, whatever." Negotiate terms, but it's talking to people that I really enjoy. Talking to someone like yourself, talking to other people who interview me, talking to people across the counter at, say, a Christmas market when I'm selling books and signing them, talking to people in the writing group, talking at any stage about what I get up to, and how I construct and what my processes are to get these books together. I put a post out on Facebook yesterday actually about I'd found some of the notes about On the Beat. I'd found these the original poems, and I'd found the original order I was going to put them in, and it was just really nice to sort of come across what had been my coffee morning doodlings that ended up all these months later as a finished book that's been out since December. Is ticking along quite nicely, and every day I've got people on Kindle Unlimited reading my pages. Every so often someone's kind enough to buy a copy, and you just think that's cool. And I've got people in Australia, I've got people in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, France, United Kingdom. It feels like it can travel. I think it can work in countries where perhaps United Kingdom policing is not as familiar to others. But yeah, I think I feel generally pretty cool and chilled about it all.
Awesome guy. Awesome. And this kind of leads now to a sort of fun question that I've now added to my list of questions because it is a very interesting discussion. So, if I remember correctly from our last interview, which is technically our first interview together, you began writing your fiction books around, if I'm not mistaken, maybe during quarantine or maybe a few years after quarantine. And this, of course, led to, a lot of authors that I've had a pleasure to meet after our interview saying the same thing, that they began writing during quarantine and the lockdown. And a previous guest of mine posted on her page, shout out to Jasmine Young for this, and in her opinion, she argued that the 4 years of quarantine and lockdown led the way, led the way to a golden era of independent creators, whether that's musicians, artists, authors, and so forth. And it really got me thinking, and I have my own answer to this, but I pose this to you, Guy. In your opinion, do you believe or do you feel that the 4 years in lockdown did pave the way for this next golden age of independent creators?
I'd certainly like to think so. I think, certainly from my perspective, that particular period of inactivity led me to persevere with something that I'd always wanted to do. But for whatever reason, there was always a distraction or something else that needed to be done that stopped the process going to fulfillment. That particular period of time forced me to, well, it forced me, I was sat and had an opportunity to see if I could write a book because I didn't know if I could. And I didn't, people always say, yeah, of course you can, but it's easy to say it, it's doing it. And to do it once was really satisfying. to do it then twice, that difficult second album. You know, I managed to get a second book out. Third book now, yeah, I don't necessarily sort of see myself resting on my laurels, but I feel really comfortable with my place in the industry. I've seen an incredible amount of new talent, certainly on Kindle Unlimited, that I tap into, that people would not necessarily get an opportunity to be backed by a traditional publishing house. So they've gone ahead themselves. And I've read some stuff and I've reviewed it, and been really supportive. And yeah, I think you're right. And then certainly other artistic avenues, music, artists, painting, social media sites that have become more thoughtful and creative and less, we like to think, less negative. One of the things that I've learned and kind of taught myself is that positivity is the key for me. And if I can't say something nice about someone or something, then I won't bother. It's, for me, a platform, whichever platform I might be on at that time, to share a positive message to support an individual who's taken the time and trouble to post a message, whatever that message may be. And I always enjoy people being positive on my stuff. It isn't difficult to turn that around and be positive towards other people. And if you can outweigh the negativity and the down and the poorness that happens within social media, then I think we hold the key ourselves as individuals to turn it around and make the naysayers and the people with the glass that's always half empty, to make them the minority. And we, the more positive, the more optimistic, can share and enjoy each other's forums in whichever way we want to do that.
Absolutely. And that is something we'll touch on near the end of the interview and talk about, networking and people that we've met who have helped us along the way. Before we get to that, let's now turn to the business side of being an author and your experience with that aspect of the process guide. So, from our last interview, you've said that you've gone the way of an independent author and you've self-published all of your books. And I have no doubt that On the Beat will also be self-published as well. So, when you were writing, or I should say, when you were now in the process of publishing On the Beat, did you have already a good idea of your audience, or did that process come a little bit later in the phase? Where did you think of your audience in the pre-writing phase, that transference from poems to short stories, or the post-marketing phase where you're now trying to build awareness for On the Beat?
So at the start of last year, when I was actually just putting the manuscript together, I began to seek and obtain followers from within law enforcement internationally, and sought and secured followers within those fields, and tried also to find university lecturers in criminology, sociology, psychology, who I could tap into and get them to become my followers, with a view to them being potential customers for this particular book. So yeah, I suppose I did drill down into a demographic to try and find people that primarily I thought this may appeal to. It's easy to dismiss the general public, because you would think initially your customers are going to be fellow law enforcement people. But now I suppose with 3 months since, there is a good deal of support from the general public with their reviews and their thoughts about On the Beat as a book that's really enlightened them and given them an insight that they perhaps didn't previously have, to certainly how things were done in the police of London back in the 1980s. So that's been helpful. I think I also just generally worked out that my style of social media in encounters and interactions is to try and tell stories, just general everyday stories of what I'm getting up to, and then give the reader something to enjoy, and then sort of put a little bit of a reminder at the bottom, say, oh, by the way, I also write books, and lead them perhaps to some of my other pages where they can find, where they can purchase or find my stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm learning as I'm going along. It's been interesting. Some of it's not worked, some of it has worked. Someone said to me, "You're far too old for TikTok," but I've given it a go, and tried to teach myself how to do short videos, little extracts and things like that, making a fool of myself. But that's a good learning curve. It's good fun, and like I said to you earlier, one of the things about me now is I don't take myself too seriously. Um, we're not talking, life and death. I'm a writer because I'm fortunate enough to be able to enjoy being a writer. And when there's no pressure, I think it makes you behave slightly differently. And if you can add a relaxation to what you do, and also test the water with new stuff, always trying to find new avenues, new things. I mentioned to you before we started the fact that I've got a Substack page.
Yes.
We started about 5 weeks ago, and I was invited by a really good friend all the way back from my time at school, and he said, you ought to give that a go. And it's just given me the freedom to, you write on social media sites and you're limited with the amount of words you can put, and your messages can only be of a certain length. Well, on Substack, I can get stuck in and write 3,000 or 4,000 words on a particular topic and hope, well, I don't even hope, I just put it out there, and if someone is kind enough to read it and say, I enjoyed that, then that's quite rewarding. I don't charge for my subscription. I put everything up free to subscribe, and I post. I've kind of got into the habit of posting one new article every Tuesday, so one article a week, and hopefully for the most, as we move forward, that's how I'll continue to do it. I'm not looking to make money from it. I'm looking just to get people to read my stuff, maybe point them in the direction of the novels, which are all found with links on my Substack page. So it's just all working out how to market for someone like myself. I'm self-published, so I'm self-marketing. I've got my team around me, as far as that my wife is my number one fan, stroke proofreader, stroke copy editor. I have a team that does my formatting. I have a cover designer that does that for me, and they're kind of always available. So when the new projects come along, I know who I need to contact. I know how much it's going to cost me, because they always charge the same, apart from a few, bit of interest as it goes up. But it's more or less the same. And so I know where I am. Yes, it may well be that I do endeavour to perhaps query to a literary agent again with this new one, just to test the water. But my experience now within the industry, with 3 books behind me, is that you really do almost need to be winning the lottery. That's the odds of getting picked up by a literary agent to then take you forward to a traditional publisher. And unless you absolutely market it to death, chances are it's going to disappear without trace after a very short time. And then you don't even have the rights to the book because you've given them away. So I'm kind of happy where I am, because Dysfunction, when I put it out, I did get it published by a publishing house, albeit it was they did all the printing, and so I kind of lost control of it to a degree. So on the 17th of March, like next week, I get it back. It becomes mine again, and I can put it back on Amazon and on Kindle Unlimited for people who've got that particular subscription, to say you can read this now as I wanted it, and it's mine. And I'm really pleased about that, because I kind of, the deal I had, because I was so naive and new to it all, I kind of went down a particular avenue that I think, if I'd known what I know now, I'd never have done that. So I think you do have to learn as you go along, and I think you build your resilience, you build your experience, you build your understanding of where you sit in the industry. You don't have any expectations beyond the real. You understand that it's a difficult marketplace. It's a competitive, interesting world to move within, and I just appreciate and understand my place within it, I suppose.
That is very, very true, Guy. Everything you said about, the hassles of trying to, go traditionally published. It is not easy. I've talked to a lot of authors. In fact, my most recent guest, she talked about, what it was like to get traditionally published, and it's a lot of query letters. It's a lot of, blurbs. And for those who don't know, for those who want to go traditional publishing, you don't write the book first. You have to write the blurb first. And if the blurb is accepted, then you write the book, then you have the timetable. It's very, very different from independent publishing, where we as authors can begin writing the book immediately because we know how the story is going to be. Which ultimately leads into the next two discussions when it comes to, individuality and understanding our readership. So let's talk about the readership first. In my opinion, readership is probably the most challenging as opposed to the audience. The audience is a very broad group of individuals, a broad community, but the individual readership, those people who are going to pick up your books and read it, that's a little more challenging because each readership has its own set of rules and expectations. And in publishing, you have middle grade, you have YA for young adults, NA for new adult, which is that transition period, and AF, which is adult fiction. And almost every book, no matter what it is, nonfiction, fiction, whatever, follows those four categories. And each four has its own set of rules and expectations that authors are expected to follow. And it helps the readers get an idea of what to expect. Now, Guy, where would you say all of your books fall under? And at any point, have you considered for some of them maybe going into a different age category or just leaving them in the same?
It would be difficult to move certainly the books I've written into young adult. Certainly not children. They deal with adult themes. The language used is fairly adult. There's some pretty horrendous descriptions, certainly within On the Beat,
Right.
that I would say has to stay within the adult category. I think it may be in the future that I might write something that's a bit more for the young adult market. I like the idea of a sort of a boy's own stroke adventure story of some description, or a sort of harking back to sort of an old-fashioned era, good old-fashioned adventure stories, along the lines of sort of Treasure Island and the things that I grew up with and things like that. But I pride myself on always wanting to write something slightly different, something new to me, to challenge my own self. I never feel that I want to be pigeonholed. I think it's
Right.
always, I can't, in all honesty, think I can put the new book that I'm currently writing into anything other than adult fiction, because it's terrifying. And I can't describe it any other way. It's designed to be frightening. It's designed to make you, hopefully, if you're ever out and about, spend your whole time looking over your shoulder, because that's what I've done. I've created a horror thriller, I suppose. But that's what I wanted to create. I was just having a go at that particular genre this time around. Someone else said to me, "Could you see yourself writing a children's book?" And I think if I came across or came up with the right story, yeah, I think so. Someone else said to me, "What about a romance?" I said, "Well, possibly." As I develop as a writer, then nothing's beyond the realms of possibility. my main character in this new story, which has been a real challenge and a real enlightenment and great fun, is actually a female. So that's flipped to the other side for me, to sort of try and create a female heroine story. And I've sought advice, speak to my wife about this and that, some of the aspects of being a member of the fairer sex and how I would approach that, and maybe some of my language needs to be adjusted so that it sounds plausible. I mean, I put the female. She's a female and she's an authority figure within the narrative. So I'm having fun with it. I'm trying to be true to the character I want to create. I wrote a piece not so long ago about moving my characters around, and I equated it to like playing a game of chess, bringing people into the plot and then taking them away again, and then removing people from the plot, and so on and so forth. It's really complicated to do that. Character development, working on that. So yes, this is also such a complicated story that I've had to, like, above my computer there's a massive sheet of paper with great big flowcharts and where all the different characters come in and go, and getting the names. Bear in mind it's French, they've all got French names, the terms, the authorities within France that are all very complicated and different to those that I'm aware and used to in the United Kingdom. A real development as I push forward with what will hopefully be book number 4. And if I do decide to query and send it out, then I'll be quite disciplined insofar as that I'll do it. I'll send out as many query letters as I think I can, but I'll also have a finite period of time. I think that you've got to be realistic, and I will draw a line after a certain period of time. If I've not been successful, then I will plough ahead with my usual self-publishing method and continue. By which time I'll probably be hopefully writing number 5. So it's writing's come to me late in life, Gabriel. You know, lockdown happened. I was 56, and next month I'm 60, and I'm currently writing my 4th book, and I just feel, do I want to spend 2 years waiting for a literary agent and a publishing house to tear my manuscript to pieces and then rebuild it and then get around to publishing what isn't actually my original story?
Right.
Or do I just want to get on and get my work out there? And that's a tricky one. It's a tricky one to know what's the right answer. I think you and I both know what I'll probably end up doing, because I have no pressure. And I feel that if I get to 70 years of age, let's say, and I've got, who knows, 10 books published, 12 books published, then I'll feel reasonably satisfied. And it feels like you're leaving something behind that's a tangible legacy. I'm not necessarily hoping for worldwide acclaim, but if 1 or 2 people know that I've written a few books, that's quite pleasant. That's quite a nice thing to leave behind, shall we say.
That is very, very true. And that is something that we'll touch on very later towards the end of this interview. And from there, now talk a little bit about, individuality and the struggles for an author to really balance that out, because as authors are always going to be inspired by books that we've read growing up, and that will impact our writing one way or another. So for you, Guy, how have you been able to balance your individuality as the author, but also the respect and reverence to the books you've read growing up that may have impacted your writing or the writing process one way or another?
Well, I think I've learned a lot about pace and pacing a story from the books that I've read. And sometimes I've read really good adventure thrillers, and they kind of get bogged down occasionally in the narrative, but it's a necessary thing. I was chatting to someone yesterday, and they were writing a piece, and they were chatting to me about it, and they put in a lot of descriptions about a particular part of the world, because they didn't think that many people would understand. It was actually a place in Switzerland called Lucerne, and it's a town I don't know. It's a town I know nothing about. And a couple of the people that we were chatting to about this book, they said, you kind of lost the sort of the really good pace you had going because you got bogged down in all the details about Lucerne. And I kind of said, well, in this instance, I kind of like that, because you sold me, because you gave such a great description of a city I know nothing about. And now I've got in my head a picture of Lucerne during a carnival period that happens annually. And I feel that you brought that city to life, and now we can move on with the story at the pace that you had it in the lead up to that particular moment. So that's a learning thing. That's an individual thing that I think I've understood, is that be brave. Don't be confined by rules either. I think people, certainly some of the groups that I talk with and to about writing, they kind of seem to get fixated on rules. Oh, so-and-so says you can't do that. And I'm not a rule person. If you're the writer and you want to write something, then write it. Don't worry about rules. You can worry about if it's grammatically incorrect when you come to the copy editing and the proofreading stage. But
absolutely,
get it on the page, and worry about the foibles of your story once you've got the thing on paper. So yeah, I'm not a rules person. I like the fact that people do actually ask me for advice now. That's really rewarding. That I had a chap phone me up and said, "Oh, I've got this story. Could we meet and go through it?" And I sat down with him, and he wants to go down the traditional route. And I didn't dissuade him. I said, absolutely. And I gave him a few pointers, and I sort of suggested that it would be an awful lot of query letters he'd need to do, and he needed to drill down and find his particular agents that would be looking for his particular story. And he's going ahead with it, and he'll come back to me, I hope, and give me an opportunity to have a chat with how it's going. Because I've been there, I've done that, I've had a go at that. I know where he's coming from. It's hard to know if he's successful. Then I think that's absolutely wonderful, and he deserves all the success, because it will be a great book. But I just don't necessarily feel this industry at the moment is looking out for those sort of things. They seem to be pretty narrow in the parameters of what it is they're looking for. And it saddens me a little bit. And I do wonder if the industry is at the point where it needs a massive shake-up, because I don't see how it can continue. The detrimental way that I feel independent authors are viewed by the traditional publishing houses has got to change, because they're missing out on some terrific stories out there, because they won't commit or be brave enough to try something, because it's not a guaranteed return, and they've got themselves into a bit of a fixated position with money, and somewhere along the line someone's going to draw a line in the sand and say, enough, you're missing out. You can't just put out stuff by people that are known or people that are celebrities and have that leg up already. You've got to try and be original in your thinking, and I can only hope that we see that happen in the years ahead.
Absolutely, 100%. And as we near the end of this interview, Guy, there's a few last questions I want to ask you. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, where it's like, the people that have been by your side, your wife, your colleagues who have helped you along the way. And you've also mentioned that you've also have a team of your own who helps you with your books. You have some people who are the editors and copy editors. I know your wife is the premier. She's the first one who reads all of your work before it goes to the other people. You have a cover artist who helps with your book. So you've established a really great team. So with that said, are there any personal shouts you want to give to other people who have helped you along the way?
Well, I think this is it's an anomaly really sometimes, but my close family, with the exception of my wife, who's been absolutely 100% behind me, my close family tend to be a little bit doubtful about my credentials as an author. I think they find it difficult to understand and recognise that I've published 3 books, and you'd think they'd be 100% in your corner. I don't know if it's the experience of other writers, authors, but in my situation, it doesn't seem to be the case, as they tend to be a little bit more at arm's length. I'll give you an example. When I told my niece that I've just published my 3rd book in December, I kind of thought, oh, she kind of download it because she reads a lot of stuff on Kindle, and she said, oh, I'll put it on my to be read list. Okay, fine. Wasn't kind of the answer I expected, but having spoken to a few other people about this, I wonder now I've hit on something, that close family can be almost your harshest critics and your most difficult audience. And so if you want me to shout out to people, I would say certainly in the last 12 months, it's been my former colleagues in the police, because I was writing a police story. Now, I kind of thought I'd lump them in the same category as my close family because they'd be quite tough. And yes, they have been quite tough, but they've also been really supportive and right behind me. So a big shout out to them for all the kind words and the pats on the back, both literally and metaphorically, for what I'd put together. And the fact that I'd kind of done them justice, and that it's left them feeling that time that they spent working with me and at that particular time in the police was the most rewarding time for them within their 30 years service as well. And we both sort of come to that same conclusion. So that's been really nice. More recently, meeting up with a couple of old school friends through social media and reconnecting with them, which has led to me now having a Substack page, because one of the friends, he invited me to get involved with that. I proofread one of his pieces, which I'm hoping that he'll get round to publishing. Or he says he wants to go down the query route. We'll see. But it's a story that's really worth reading, and I hope we get to see that published. So that I just feel like I'm building a little bit of a little circle of like-minded people, and it kind of increases. It's kind of international. The fact that I'm on these sort of sites, the fact that I'm speaking to someone like yourself, it gets me out there. It gets people to sort of say, "Oh, who's this guy Robin character? What's he all about?" And they might then go hunting and find out a little bit more about me. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's gradually going to seep into people's consciousness, perhaps, as we move on. And I'm more than happy with that. I know where I'm going. I know what this next stage of my writing journey has in store for me. And I think what's beautiful now is that I can be included as someone that might be someone people seek advice from, as well as me needing the advice still, because I'm still young in my journey. I'm also finding that people are interested in listening to what I have to say on occasion. And that's quite a nice thing to happen. So, yeah, really good.
Awesome, guy. Awesome. And the final question for this interview, which has been incredible and absolutely the greatest start of my day today. Everything you've learned thus far from our first interview a year ago to now, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors and writers who want to begin their journey and maybe listening to this interview or watching this interview right now?
It's quite simple, a simple message. If you feel that you can write a story, then just write the story. Don't be distracted. Don't be dissuaded. It's not easy. It's not it won't flow off the pen and into your pages or onto a computer easily. Break it down into piecemeal stages. My process now, I'm pretty disciplined in how I write, insofar as that I know I'm a morning person. I do my writing first thing in the morning. So before all the other rubbish, all the emails and the marketing stuff and the bills to pay and all the other stuff that you sort of think you need to do, before anything else, that's when I do my 1,000 words. And I'm a 1,000 words a day man. From what I read, Stephen King used to say he was a 2,000 words a day person. That's how he wrote. And he wrote roughly 3 months of writing to get a decent novel for him. So for me, it's more like 6 months of writing, I suppose. But I overlap. So I've been writing this particular story since about, when did I start? About May of last year. So I kind of came into it. I had a bit of a break for the summer because we get lots of people coming to see us. I had a break. But since January, I've been plodding on, usually because the days are shorter, the weather's not quite so pleasant in the winter, and I hunker down and I sit and do my writing. I just say to someone, you're coming into this as a new person, just write your story. Don't worry about grammar, particularly. Don't worry about spelling at this stage. Just get your story out. We can worry about all those bits and pieces. If you've got a story to tell your story. Don't feel, oh, I can't do that, because you probably can. You'll probably be surprised that you could suddenly find you've sat down and written over 6 months, 100,000 words, and you've got yourself a manuscript. And then worry about all the things that come after that once you've done it. I think people start, certainly the group of friends and writers that I know, there's quite a few of them that they're already talking about publishing and things like that, and they've only written a quarter of a novel. They kind of, to me, they get ahead of themselves. I compartmentalize and I deal with one thing at a time. And to me, let's get the book written, let's get the story. Then I can throw it at Paula gently and say, darling, would you please give this a read and see what you think? And she'll give me the nod or not about whether this is a manuscript that we could fly with, and go from there. Have fun with it. Enjoy. It's the bit about the process I enjoy the most. You can keep everything else. I'm not that fussed for it all. But the actual writing, that's the bit that I love. So coming back to Substack, and that may be a good place to start. There's no pressure on Substack. Write 1,000, 2,000 words, a little short story, a little piece, a little character study, and just throw it up there. And I love that. You know, I think I've wrote a piece about reality television last week. I've got a fictional character that I've got an episode of that went up today, and then I think next week I'm going to write something about my music tastes, which are fairly eclectic and interesting, to say the least. But I thought there's no parameters to stop me doing anything, so maybe that's a good place to start. Rather than trying to throw a novel together, test the water by throwing a few things up on one of these platforms like Substack, of which there are plenty of others out there. But to me, Substack seemed straightforward, easy to use, quite welcoming, and you can charge people if you choose to, but I don't. You can subscribe to the Writer's Block for free.
Awesome guy. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing author interview here on the channel. A huge thank you to Guy Robbins for making his second appearance here on the channel. Now, Guy, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? And do you have any upcoming projects you would like to share with our viewers and readers so that way they can write it down and make sure to pre-order it when it becomes available?
So obviously all my novels are on Amazon. I write, my author name is Guy Robin, Robin. You can find Dysfunction, Indomitable, and On the Beat on Amazon as paperbacks and Kindle versions. And from the 17th, they will all be on Kindle Unlimited. You can find out more about me on my Amazon page, on my author page, a little bit of information about me as an individual. I have a Facebook page, Guy Robin Author, where I'll talk to you a little bit about what I'm up to and what's coming up. I have a LinkedIn page, Guy Robin, again, where I tell you what I'm up to, publish stories, links to my Substack page where you can read. Yes, the Substack page is actually called The Writer's Block by Guy Robin. And as I say, I try and publish every Tuesday. I don't charge if you want to subscribe. Everything that goes up there is free. I don't put anything behind a paywall. So it's all available to read. I think there's 7 articles at the moment because I've only been doing it for a very short time. I'm on Threads as Guy Robin Author. I'm on TikTok as Guy Robin Author. I'm on Instagram as Guy Robin Author. And I think I've exhausted them all now. I think I'm on about, six pages. I haven't got a website as yet, but that is something that we're thinking about once we've got a few more things that we feel we need to say. But at the moment, I'm fairly available on social media. As I said, as you guys probably know, I'm an English person living in France, and albeit my stuff's on Amazon, it is on Amazon worldwide, so you can pick it up on amazon.com.co.uk, .au, .de, .fr, wherever you be on the planet, you can tap into my stuff and have a look and see what you think. As I say, I also have this new story, a horror thriller that I hope to have published as my 4th novel, possibly in time for the Christmas market at the end of this year. It's been a real pleasure, as ever, Gabriel, and perhaps when my new novel comes out, we'll be chatting again.
Absolutely, Guy. Absolutely. And I will make sure to include all that down below in the description of this video, and also make sure to check out Guy's first interview right here to check it out. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And thank you again for joining us for another author interview. And a huge thank you to Guy. We wish him the very best on his author journey. And as Guy said, hopefully when his next book is out, we can have him back on the show again for his 3rd interview to talk about that and possibly another work in progress that he has in the pipeline. But until then, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world.